Economies. So we're very pleased to have with us distinguished policymakers. We have development partners, we have energy experts and researchers, and participants from across different countries. So before I set the stage for today's session, I would like to set some housekeeping rules quickly. So if anybody has any questions, so they can raise their hands or they can share their questions in the chat box. And I would request everybody to please keep your microphones muted during the session. And lastly, please be very concise in the interest of time, as we have very short time today. So I would request to present your perspectives in your designated timelines, please. So now I think let me quickly set the tone for today's session. So as we know, today's session that is titled Financing Grid Modernization, and we know that how countries are fast deploying the renewable energy. So it's becoming very clear that the transition is no longer only about adding clean generation capacity. It's equally about how our grids are capable enough of integrating this renewable energy. And especially if we talk about the country perspectives from coal-dependent economies, the mobilization of finance for grid modernization is becoming increasingly, critical for achieving energy transition. So today's discussion brings together diverse experiences and perspectives to explore practical solutions, challenges, and the way forward. So before further ado, I would like to invite the Executive Director of STPI and the Chairman Board of Directors, Dr. Abid Qayyum Saleri, to deliver the opening remarks. Sir Saleri, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nurulan. Good afternoon, good morning, and a late afternoon to all, depending from where you have joined today's discussion. And a very warm welcome to all our distinguished speakers, partners, and participants joining us today. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this consultative discussion on financing grid modernization for renewable energy integration in coal-dependent economies. And while we are sitting in Pakistan, I think Pakistan is a classic textbook case where we have seen two phenomena simultaneously. One is quick adoption of solarization. Almost 35 gigawatt of solar panels are imported in last 2 years. And then we also found out that our grid connectivity is not there. Not only the storage of electricity produced by solar, but also the connectivity, the distribution of the solar electricity that is being produced by prosumers, which is actually leading the government to take certain measures, including applying taxes on import of imported solar panels and inverters, etc. So within this context, we wanted to have this discussion on grid modernization, and this discussion could not have been possible or could not have been eloquent had we not get the support and collaboration from our partner think tanks, and especially International Network for Energy Transition think tank, SciNet. We here, while we are presenting our case, we have speakers and panelists from the Institute for Essential Services Reform from Indonesia, the Public Affairs Research Institute from South Africa, as well as our colleagues from African Development Bank, Asian Development Bank, IEA, and ARENA, who have joined us. And with this diversity of panelists and distinguished experts, we really want to think that the situation that we are facing in Pakistan, it's A is not a unique situation. Perhaps more than one countries are the countries which were previously dependent on coal and now trying to transit all of them. They are facing it, but then different countries, they have their different means and ways of uh, going ahead. As I said, in Pakistan, we tried to uh, curb the import of solar panels, not only because of grid as a lack of connectivity, but also because of our agreements with the independent power producers. But one would like to understand the best practices, what worked and what didn't work in different other countries, which are in uh, facing the same challenges and problems that Pakistan is facing today. And on the basis of it, while we can look at the mutual lessons learned, we can look at what worked and what didn't work, and accordingly we can come up with policy recommendations for our respective governments. But one thing that is clear in all this, that while a lot of work and lot of efforts and resources are being put on greening our energy and on renewable sources, one important prerequisite, which is this power system, the grid, its integration and its management, that somehow keeps getting ignored. And this brings the issue of grid modernization to the center of transition debate. Transmission networks, distribution systems, flexibility solutions, storage and digital technologies. They are, of course, a technical component of our sector, but they are also strategic infrastructures. And working on these infrastructure is as important as bringing in the technology itself. We also know that the current Iran US situation, it has actually forced almost all fuel import dependent countries to reset their energy systems. And as part of this resetting, indigenization of energy production and indigenization of electricity production, that has become extremely important. And this is again where this grid modernization that would become very important. Now, when one look at this combination of the three countries, Indonesia, Pakistan, and South Africa, this challenge is particularly complex because these countries, they are trying to transit away from coal while ensuring energy security, affordability, and economic as well as grid stability. And it's easy to read all these jargons, but of course it's quite difficult to integrate it and modernize it. Not only that it requires finances, but it also requires technical know-how, and that's where international cooperation that becomes very important. As we look ahead to COP31, there is a growing recognition that achieving global climate goal will require greater attention to enabling infrastructure, particularly electricity grids. Grid modernization must become a central pillar of climate action and international climate finance discussion, as it is a make or break. It can either turn this whole transition successful, or it can actually be a major barrier for this. Finally, in today's discussion, one is looking at the opportunity to learn from international experience. As I said earlier, at STPI, we have been working on issues related to coal transition, renewable energy integration, grid readiness, and sustainable finance. We hope that the dialogue will contribute to developing practical recommendations and strengthening collaboration across countries facing similar transition challenges. With that, I look forward to an engaging discussion and learning from all the distinguished panelists. And I thank you again to different speakers from different time zones who have taken their time out and who have joined us today. Over to you, Nurulan.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleri, for your insightful remarks and setting the stage for today's discussion. Without further ado, we'll now move to our next keynote presentation, which will provide the context and the key objective of this initiative, basically. So with pleasure, I would like to invite Ms. Zainab Babar. She is the team lead for transition finance and in energy unit of STPI to deliver the keynote presentation. Please, ma'am. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Noor, and thank you everybody for your time today. Just give me a second to share my presentation. I hope my screen is visible.
Yeah.
Yes, it's
Anyway,
visible.
shift to
Yeah.
slideshow mode.
Yeah, slideshow will be easier. Thank you.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Okay. So I'll begin with a brief introduction of the research institution, research initiative that we are working collaboratively with the IESR and PARI. So it's rethinking climate finance, accelerating the energy transition by focusing on grid modernization. As Dr. Saleri mentioned that there is a strategic value that lies within this partnership. There are a number of commonality that exists between Pakistan, South Africa, and Indonesia. If we talk about it, number one is that in all of these countries, the share of coal power generation is high. Secondly, there is a growing acceleration or adoption of renewable energy in all of these three countries. And the primary one, which is going to be the focus of our research, is the grid-related challenges that are associated with both of these things, that is the increasing share of renewable and the coal power generation. The basic aim of this research is that we have seen our traditional grid model is kind of built in a way that it supports fossil fuel power generation more because it's kind of outdated and inflexible. But when we talk about renewable energy, we know that renewable energy requires flexibility, and we know that in Pakistan and in other countries, we've seen that the renewable energy power generation is facing the issues of curtailment because of the grid capacity issues. So this is where the question or research question lies, that why the grid is not updated with the increasing share of renewable energy or with the increasing interest towards renewable energy. What we have seen and observed over the period of past 5 or 10 years is that there are a number of financing options available for renewable energy adoption. Or when we talk about coal retirement, we have seen there are a number of financing instruments like energy transition mechanisms by ATB, JETPs, and then we have seen there are coal to clean credit initiatives and a number of other financing initiatives that we can kind of leverage to use for coal retirement. But when we talk about grid modernization, there are not any set financing instruments that we can opt for, and there is not any particular focus that you can say that climate finance is focusing specifically on this pillar. So considering this aspect in our mind, we designed this overall research that how we want to go forward. The aim of this research is that we want to redirect the climate finance toward grid upgrades to enable the large-scale renewable energy integration, strengthen the investor confidence, and provide comparative insights from the three countries that have partnered for this research. As I've mentioned that coal retirement and renewable energy have kind of certain financing interventions, financing avenues that they can opt for, but there are not any set specific financial avenues that can be specifically leveraged for grid modernization. We know that renewable energy potential, if we talk about specifically about Pakistan, Pakistan have a lot of renewable energy potential, but we cannot reap that potential until we don't have a grid that is flexible enough to integrate this renewable energy. So for getting the benefit from renewable energy, we need to build the grid first. I'm not going to go into the details of country-specific context because for that we have a dedicated section that's coming up next. So we'll focus on this in the next section. This is the part where I would like to get your feedback and your insights mainly. This is how our research approach is to move forward. But firstly, we want to analyze that what are the challenges that each country is facing with their grid. It's kind of going to be a diagnostic, which kind of we have done recently, and which our colleagues will be sharing shortly. In the second stage, we want to see that what are the investment priorities, because we see that there are a number of avenues where grid can be kind of developed, and it could be in expansion, it could be the optimization of grid, or it could be in bringing in the scalability or flexibility of grid. There could be different priorities for different countries depending upon the country situation. So we would like to hear your insights that in your perspective, what are the investment priorities should be for each country, or in your expert opinion that should be the priority for grid modernization. Third is we want to map the international finance, that what are the channels that are already established, building on that or capitalizing on those channels, where we can kind of get the benefit for making grid modernization or kind of establishing grid modernization as an enabler for energy transition. The main outcome of this research that we kind of envision is the replicable grid-centric climate finance model that should be linked with the international financial architecture. What we want to do is that the lessons that we would have from all these three country analysis, we are going to have a comparative assessment of all those lessons, and we were going to see that what are the common instruments or the common things that can work for each country, and then what are the tailored solutions or tailored financial instruments that are going to help each country in their trajectory for energy transition. And based on that, we want to make a framework which is based on a phased roadmap of implementation that could be used for these countries that are part of this research, and also for the other countries in the global south that kind of have the similar challenges that we are facing. Yeah, so this is a short introduction of the overall project. I think we'll now move towards the detailed country perspectives that we have. Over to you, Noorlan.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your insightful presentation. And you have rightly highlighted the challenges and opportunities surrounding the grid modernization. So building on your insights, we'll now move to hear an international perspective from Pakistan, South Africa, and Indonesia. So first of all, I would like to invite Dr. Khalid Waleed, Senior Research Fellow from Energy Unit in STPI. Sir, please, we would like to hear the Pakistan's perspective from you. So the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Noor. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. This is very important for Pakistan as well as for Global South, because we are facing this integrated problem of 3 E's. I always say economy, energy, environment in one equation. So Pakistan is facing the same problem. Noor, if you could tell me if my slides are visible.
Yes, sir, they're visible.
They're visible. Okay. Now in slide share mode?
Not in the slideshow mode.
Not in the slide share mode. Okay. How about now?
Yes, now.
Okay. Thank you. So what is happening in Pakistan is that majority of the investments that we have done over the past 2 decades, 3 decades, those were basically focused to eliminate Pakistan's load shedding crisis. That was accessibility crisis in Pakistan. We had uh, supply constraints, we had growing demand that created accessibility crisis. But in that solving that crisis, Pakistan invested so much on building Pakistan's generation capacity. First, it created affordability crisis for Pakistan that we overinvested. And those power plants, those were based on debt finance, very expensive power purchase, long-term agreements. And second, we didn't invest on our grid infrastructure. And now, because electricity is very expensive, people are spending their monies on distributed generation solar, and that distributed generation solar is causing problem for Pakistan. And now we do not have grid modernization or grid investments intact. Because of that, one, grid demand is declining. Second, grid's reliability is at the stakes as well. So this is lack of grid infrastructure in Pakistan, and it is acting as a binding constraint in Pakistan. Just to give you an overview, in Pakistan, if you include hydro, the share of renewables is around 30% in Pakistan. And if you exclude hydro dams, because in some definitions, solar and wind, they are considered as renewables, uh, it is not more than 5% at grid. But if you include distributed generation solar, it increases by like 20%. So there is a solar boom, solar revolution in Pakistan that is community financed. It has not been financed by government or any other financial institution. People themselves invested on their rooftops to put rooftop solar panels there. And then grid is facing a huge problem of 17 to 18% transmission and distribution losses, which delve into a circular debt that is a vicious cycle started from these transmission and distribution losses, goes all the way to the generation companies, and the loop continues. And it has a big amount of 1.6 trillion rupees in Pakistan right now. If you compare the fossil versus renewable ratio, including hydro, you'll see that 55.7% are fossil fuel-based thermal power plants, and 44.3% they are, if you include hydro, there are that as well. There are different targets, particularly in NDCs, that we want to phase out coal, particularly the imported coal, because it is creating two-pronged problems in Pakistan. First, the environmental climate change problem. Second, there are increasing capacity charges or fixed charges that we pay, consumer pays to these power plants. So we need to do that as well. There is a national grid company in Pakistan, which is the sole proprietor of maintaining the national grid of Pakistan. And there is financial gap as well. There are 19 grid stations of 500 kilowatts, 49 grid station at 220. If you calculate the transmission lines of 500 kV, they're around 1900 kilometers, and 220 kilowatts volts are 11.8 kilometers. What we need to do is we need to expand our integrated planning component, that is transmission system expansion plan of Pakistan. That is a 10-year plan combined with the IGSAP, that is indicative generation capacity expansion plan. That is again for 10 years. But the problem is that we have a financial requirement of 8.7 billion USDs. This is just the planning number. We do not have that sort of a money. Advisor to finance minister, he can also share that constraint as well. This is what Pakistan's problem is. Pakistan's indigenous sources, particularly the hydropower plants, indigenous coal power plants, and wind power plants, they are either in north or in south. But the load is basically in the center of Pakistan, which I say is Caesar effect in Pakistan. The center load is around 71 terawatt hours. The north load is 24 terawatts, and South's load is around 27 terawatts. If you combine these two, South and North, center still consumes more than these two South and North corridors. So if electricity is generated, cheap electricity is generated here and here, there is a challenge for National Grid company to transmit that electricity all the way from north and south to the center. So this is where RLNG power plants comes in. To ensure the thermodynamics and electrical engineering principles, they have built these RLNG power plants in the center and one coal plant, imported coal plant in the center to support this load coming from either south to north. But because we do not have a modernized grids, there is a constraint to evacuate power from south to center or north to center. That's where RLNG power plants and imported coal power plants comes in. And because of these power plants, our marginal cost increases. This is one problem, but because of this geopolitical crisis, RLNG is curtailed. So there is energy crisis like situation in Pakistan, in the center of Pakistan as well. So there is a dire need to, invest on grid infrastructure, particularly to integrate the distributed generation solar that is primarily mostly reside in the center of Pakistan. It is everywhere in Pakistan, but the quantity is higher in the center of Pakistan, so that if there is a modernized grid, grid can act as storage facilities, act as evacuation constraints can be resolved as well. So this is what the geographic problem of Pakistan as well. Second problem that Pakistan faces is this duck curve. And I say that in Pakistan, the duck curve has been converted into a dragon curve for Pakistan. My apologies to duck and dragons, but just to show you the context and magnitude of it, because of the distributed solar that is installed in Pakistan's, the daytime demand decreases exponentially. And again, when there is no sun, it increases exponentially, and it has created this duck to dragon effect in Pakistan. So keeping that in mind, we need to again modernize our national grid as well. What are different technologies that can unlock Pakistan's renewable energy potential, plus linking it with Pakistan's grid modernization? First, again, battery storage, which sits very well in early retirement of coal power plants and repurposing of coal power plants, because we can repurpose particularly the imported coal power plants with refinancing from Chinese financial institution to battery energy storage facilities. That could be a good example for South countries. Then SCADA and real-time visibility, particularly for distributed generation assets, dynamic line rating, which is very important, and a low-hanging fruit, particularly when it comes to the evacuation services, synchronous condensers. That is again a good avenue for repurposing. Planned curtailment. Whenever there is a curtailment in Pakistan, the first asset that is curtailed is wind power plants, because the grid doesn't need them. So if there is a battery energy storage facility in Pakistan's wind corridor, that could be a good thing to have, and we need to cater that as well. Another thing that Pakistan is pursuing in parallel is these market reforms. We are converting our electricity market from single buyer to competitive trading market. Again, this will require from software tweaks to hardware tweaks, just like grid modernization as well. So competitive market will also need distributed generation and grid modernization as well. Then there is a circular debt problem. We cannot pay to our generation companies because of transmission and distribution losses. So we need to modernize our national grid so that we halt that as well. But the problem is that where the monies would come from. Just like Dr. Abid mentioned, that in COP31, grid modernization and grid networks, they would be a pillar as well. So linking climate finance, grid modernization, early retirement of coal power plants, a repurposing of coal power plants, and grid modernization, that could solve multiple problems with one solution. And that is one thing that we need to focus on as well. Or NDCs, they require around 565 billion USDs if we want to achieve the targets of NDCs, and it is way beyond our GDP of 1 year as well. So we need to look into that as well. Then we need to have 8.7 billion USDs for our transmission and grid modernization. This is where if we link early retirement of coal, uptake of renewable energy, Pakistan solar boom, and link it with grid modernization and climate finance, I think we can have a good case for maybe green panda bonds, credit guarantees, blended finance, particularly attracting climate finance plus private financing. That could be one thing to have. And then carbon markets. These sort of instruments can be looked into for grid modernization as well. Lastly, there is a fragmented institutional map in Pakistan. There is a slow coordinated planning. Policy is under Ministry of Energy Power Division. Regulation is under NEPRA or regulator. There are transmission companies, distribution companies, but more that Ministry of Energy Power Division is not talking to Ministry of Climate Change, and Ministry of Climate Change and Power Division, they are not in a good sync with Ministry of Finance. So if there is a coordinated approach and we bring all these factors, climate finance, grid modernization, early retirement of coal power plants, repurposing of coal power plants, battery energy storage, and distributed generation, I think Pakistan can solve this fragmented institutional problem as well, and we can have a good federal provincial coalition as well. These are few near-term, medium-term, and long-term solutions that Pakistan can do to solve its roadmap from 2026 to 2040. So Pakistan needs to recognize that grid, they are now the primary problem to solve this 3E crisis that I was talking about: economy, energy, environment. We need to have tailored instruments, particularly green panda bonds, because of the Chinese financial investments into Pakistan's coal and wind energy power plants, and avenue for battery energy storage facilities. Then we need to strengthen our regulator, electricity regulator, and independent system and market operator. And then we need to formalize a planned curtailment plan, and we need to solve it through battery energy storage facilities. And then Asian Development Bank is investing high in Pakistan for advanced metering infrastructure. They do have energy transition mechanism as well. And lastly, we need to pursue this South-South cooperation, because problems are similar in Global South, and we can have a case study done in Pakistan and other southern countries like South Africa and Indonesia that can be replicated in respected countries. So with this, thank you so much for joining us. Looking forward to other countries' case studies as well. Back to you, Noor and Zainab. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Khalid, for such insightful presentation and for highlighting the key challenges, especially the demand side mismatch and the curtailment issues. So without further ado, I would like to now hear the perspective from South Africa. So it's my pleasure to invite Dr. Tracy Ledger, Head of the Just Transition Program at the Public Affairs Research Institute, South Africa. Dr. Ledger, floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. Can you see my presentation?
Yeah.
Great. All right. I'm just going to run through the presentation quickly. I'm here with my colleague Frank Spencer, who did most of the substantive technical work on this. Just to give you a brief overview of the South African power system, the majority of installed generation is still coal. And that is concentrated in the state-owned power utility Eskom, whereas the renewables are from independent power producers. At the moment, utility scale renewables make up 12% of installed capacity, and almost all of it, as I said, is owned by these independent power producers. But what we've seen is a rapid acceleration in rooftop solar, which has now significantly overtaken utility scale renewables. And the main driver of that increase in rooftop solar has been load shedding. So we had a period of periodic power outages from 2008, which peaked in 2023 when households and businesses were faced with long periods without power, and that is what has driven that rooftop growth. That has slowed a little recently, but it is still growing because of the rapid increase in electricity prices, which have outstripped inflation. Important for the grid is that the delivery of electricity is highly fragmented. There is one transmission company, the National Transmission Company of South Africa, which is still whose assets are still part of Eskom. There's a plan to unbundle the assets out of Eskom and to put them into the National Transmission Company, but there's still some dispute around that. But distribution is particularly fragmented, and that is important for getting rooftop solar integrated into the grid, because that would by and large happen at the distribution level. Distribution is split approximately 50-50 between the national utility Eskom and 178 licensed local government municipal distributors. Many of those distributors are in a very poor financial state. Collectively, they currently owe Eskom almost 100 billion rand in arrear debt. As in Pakistan, the grid here is the binding constraint on getting renewables onto the system. It's not generation cost or investor appetite. We've got almost 85 gigawatts of approved renewable capacity is waiting to be connected to the grid, but there is no space on the grid for it to connect. The way in which South Africa's power system has been constructed is that Eskom's power stations are located primarily in the northeastern part of the country in proximity to coal fields, and the grid is built around connecting those power stations to the center province Gauteng, where most of the economic development takes place, whereas much of the renewable capacity is distributed spatially very, very far away from those centers. So a similar spatial challenge in terms of the location of renewables and the location of demand centers in Pakistan. The amount of money required is considerable for expanding the grid for those from 2025 to 2029. 112 billion rand, that is approximately $7 billion, and approximately 440 billion rand is required over the next 10 years. And there's a considerable funding gap. So the vast majority of the finance that is required has not yet been obtained. When we have a look at the JET-P funding, similar to the issues that Zainab pointed out, is that the majority of JET-P funding is to encourage coal phase out or coal phase down. So it's very much focused around activities around closing power stations, and not specifically focused on building out the grid. In terms of the JET-P, the composition of the JET-P funding is problematic. And what has happened is that the funds that have been allocated so far tend to be directed towards the state, who is then supporting projects, and not network capital expenditure projects. The other problem with the keeping track of the JET-P funding is that we have a JET-P register, which is supposed to keep track of what projects are happening. But even though there are tags on the register for transmission and distribution, these tags are largely unused. So it's very difficult for us to determine how much funding is actually reaching grid investment, but it would appear that very little of that is reaching grid investment. That is just an allocation of grants, policy loans, concessional loans, and the other kinds of funding that are available in the JET. And particularly, you can see that the highly concessional loans, none of them have been allocated. And guarantee funds are also very, very low allocated. The vast amount of the funding that's been allocated to date has been grant funding, and a lot of that has been around just energy transition issues like economic diversification and skilling of workers in the coal sector. So as we said, it's very difficult to understand if any of this money is in fact reaching the transmission and distribution issues, which are priorities. We believe that this is a way to accelerate penetration of renewables onto the grid that is perhaps more efficacious than simply supporting coal phase down by encouraging the shutdown of coal-fired power stations. So the single biggest category of investment is policy lending to national treasury, but there's no way to tell whether any of that is actually going to end up in final construction. So it's very difficult for us to calculate a deficit in terms of transmission and distribution expenditure against the allocations that are in the JET register. In terms of the funding that is available beyond the JET-P, there is Eskom internal funding, which they derive from their tariff income. That is currently the main source of expenditure on the grid. The ability of Eskom to raise further debt to fund the grid is certainly limited. We have two relatively new programs, an ITP program, which is similar in intent to the Independent Power Producers Program, that's intended to bring private sector partners into the grid to construct portions of the grid. And there is a capital guarantee vehicle, which is largely funded by the World Bank. These are really, really new initiatives. It's hard to tell how they will play out. There is some indication that we will have financing from China. A memorandum of understanding was recently signed in this regard between China and South Africa. The other main gap is in distribution. There's very little funding available for distribution grid compared to transmission grid. And that's just a quick summary of what is available. Stakeholder engagement with funders, the primary funders in the JET-P, suggest that there is a strong reluctance, in fact, to fund municipal distribution infrastructure, and that is linked in large part to the poor financial standing of many of these municipalities. The vast majority of municipalities are considered, in fact, to be unbankable. So the vast majority of the funding that has been made available so far from the JET-P partners is mostly in one loan to the city of Johannesburg. At the moment, despite the new vehicles that we've are floating around the ITP and the credit guarantee vehicle, zero private capital has been mobilized into the sector. And as I said, the ability of the national utility to raise funding is severely limited given the high levels of debt that they currently have. There are limitations on the ability of the state to raise funding. So the two main mechanisms that we are hoping will leverage private capital, without which we aren't going to see the grid extension that we require, is this independent transmission program and the credit guarantee vehicle. So even though both of these are in place, neither of them has yet resulted in capital expenditure from the private sector. So it's unknown whether or not that capital is actually going to mobilize from these sources. So in order to fill the gap and potentially also to leverage up those private sector capital mobilization strategies, we need a different approach from international finance. Important there is that there's concessional capital that has been pledged in terms of the JET-P, but none of it has yet been allocated. And the allocation of those funds and the increase in the share of concessional capital in the JET-P funding could be important in leveraging that finance. And what we see is that only a very small amount of funding is actually planned to reach transmission and distribution. Coal retirement shows a similar pattern. So, we need a better set of financing arrangements around coal retirement. But as I said, we are arguing in this that grid extension is the key factor that is needed to unlock renewables. And importantly, there is no route to finance for distribution. This is an enormous gap in the grid extension project. There is very, very little to no appetite in the private sector for funding municipal distribution grids. So we need to find a different kind of grant funding, highly concessional capital in order to be able to improve the distribution grid to the extent where it can take advantage of the additional rooftop solar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for sharing the South Africa's perspective. We'll now move to our next presenter, Mr. Putra Maswan from IESR, Institute for Central Services. He is the Finance and Economic Analyst, and he'll be sharing the Indonesia's perspective with us. So over to you, sir.
Sure, thank you. So I'm going to share my screen first.
So before you start, I would just request humbly that please try to conclude this in 10 minutes.
Oh, sure. Is it already in presentation mode? Sorry. Okay.
Yes, it is.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm Maswan from ISR. Okay, today, so I'm going to show you about the Indonesian context of the state of grid modernization financings in Indonesia at the moment. And this presentation will cover the stage 1 and stage 3 of the study. So let's go for the stage 1, and I'll go brief with this as we have time limitation. So here, this is the power system overview from 3 countries. And for Indonesia, you can see that we have the largest installed capacity, up to 95.8 gigawatt, and most of them dominated by fossil fuel because only 10% of it come from renewable at the moment. And for the market itself, it is very limited for the behind the meter solar, and it leads to the restriction for the rooftop solar at the moment. And also for the market itself, we have a monopoly market as we only have PLN as the single player for the power sectors. And then, sorry. It's like I cannot go for the next one. Apologies for the technical. Wait a moment, I need those technical issues a bit here. Okay.
Well, I think there's some technical glitch.
Yes.
Feel free to present or explain as it is.
Okay. Anyway, can you see the slide? Can everyone see the slide? Not yet.
You can see the slide much more.
Oh, okay, sure. Okay, just let me know if there is any. Okay, because like I can't see. I don't know what's wrong with this. Okay, so I go through about it. And then about the transmission and distribution current development in Indonesia, as you can see that there is a map. Um, we have like the existing and the plan, the existing development and also the plan for the interconnection across the islands in Indonesia. And at the moment, as you can see that most of the consumption are centered in Java Island, and the rest is, but most of the time we have a mismatch. Yeah, one of the challenges for our power sectors is like the mismatch between the supply and demand, because the consumption mostly in Java and the renewable energy sources are in outside Java in another island. So for that, Indonesia itself already planned to build a super grid, but it's not yet realized in practice. And also, we also have challenges regarding the growth that demand of between the demand and the consumption. As you can see, that transmission lines grew by 10.1% annually, but the consumption only grew, but the consumption grew faster at 10.3%. And then the new mandate actually of the 100 gigawatt also play a crucial changes in our energy plan. Yeah, because previously we already have the long-term plan and also the short-term plan by PLN. But recently, the president's mandate to build 100 gigawatt in 2 up to 3 years. And it created another challenge for the grid insufficiency, because like the grid infrastructure readiness is not ready to accommodate 100 gigawatt, and also it will cost more investment as well. So we will face a capital constraint, and also due to the single player of PLN, it will leads to institutional bottleneck as well. And then our plan, actually the PLN plan for the grid modernization lies on 4 pillars. That is smart transmission, smart distribution, power plants, and smart control, with each of the technologies attached. And if we look at the cost of inaction or the delays, if we keep the grid as it is, so we will have we have loss of a lot of saving, such as the electricity subsidy saving, and also avoided fossil fuel import up to 2 billion per year. And also it will cause curtailment that leads to the limitation of solar PV at the moment in Indonesia, and also it will cause coal logging as well, and social aspects such as the health saving that reach up to around 90 billion that we can save. So this is why the grid modernization in Indonesia is really is highly needed to finance. And then for the next one, this is the climate finance landscape in Indonesia at the moment. So our NDC needs 285 billion annually, and mostly consists of the energy sectors that reach up to 248 billion or 19 billion per year. And it will increase for the second NDC starting in 2031. But at the moment, our state budget only covers around 13% only, or 4.5 billion USD. And it shows how the significant gap for the power sectors. And if we look closely for the energy sector investment from 2019 up to 2023, we can see that the fossil fuel is still dominated the energy investment in Indonesia, followed by the renewable energy, and only 6% went to transmission and distribution. And that leads to the bottlenecks of our grid today. And then if we look, if we zoom into the classification of the investment, we can see here that renewable energy got 3 times more than the transmission and grid, and coal retirement got a very small amount, even because of the JETP plan. But at the moment, the coal retirement itself is being cancelled due to some political situation in Indonesia. And from here, we can see as well that the growth of renewable energy is not aligned with the growth of transmission and distribution that cause backlog and also the bottlenecks in Indonesian case. And then if we look at the financing gap for the grid infrastructure, based on the PLN RUPDL, we need, for the grid infrastructure itself, we need 29 billion USD until 2034. But at the moment, we only secure 1.6 billion from the MDB loans, both World Bank and ADB, and it only secured 5.5% out of the needs, and it gives a very significant gap up to 27.5 billion. So the way forward is that we need to, like Indonesia, need to give the private sectors to step in instead, because like so far, I mean, until today, Indonesian infrastructure still owned by or like procured and developed by PLN itself. So it's based on the public money and also based on the PLN balance sheet. And to close this gap, it is a bit impossible for that for the money that comes from the public only. So the private finance need to be unlocked to develop the grid in Indonesia. And this is the key takeaways from the Indonesian case, that grid finance is structurally under-resourced because of the significant gap of investment. And then the bottlenecks cost compound every year due to the cost of inaction and delays. And third, our balance sheet capital is the credible path forward, that we need private capitals and also private developers to step in for the grid development in Indonesia. I think, that's all from Indonesian case. Happy to discuss later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Maswan, for walking us through the experience of Indonesia's perspective. And I thank all other presenters too for their excellent technical presentations. And with that, we'll now move to our next panel discussion section. But for that, I would like to hand over the remaining moderation to my co-moderator, Ms. Zainab Babar, Program Lead Transition Finance at SDPI. Over to you, ma'am.
Well, thank you so much, Noor, and thank you, Maswan, Tracy, and Dr. Khalid for sharing insightful presentations, specifically highlighting the country cases. If I may request, Maswan, can you stop the screen sharing mode? Perfect, thank you. Okay, so I believe in the interest of time, I won't be saying much at this point. The purpose of this discussion is just to hear the thoughts from the country experts and the international experts that have joined this session. So I believe instead of 2 rounds of discussion, what we can do is that make 1 round and merge all the concepts that we want to hear from you, the interventions. So mainly we would like to hear the reflections on the case studies that we have just shared, and in your perspective, specifically if you're from a country, we would like to know the country perspective. Like we have experts from Pakistan and South Africa, if they can share the Pakistani perspective in terms of both challenging barriers that they see for grid modernization in terms of financial, technical, regulatory, and institutional challenges, and would also request if they can highlight what are the policy, market, and financial reforms that are needed for grid modernization. And also, if we talk at a higher level, what is the role that climate finance institutions and the overall climate finance architecture can play in these emerging economies for grid modernization. So without further ado, I'll open the discussion round. I'll first request Mr. Adnan Pasha. He's the advisor to Federal Minister for Finance and Revenue at Government of Pakistan. So I would request Adnan Saab to please share your insights.
No,
And
thank
also,
you very
sorry,
much.
I would request all the panelists to please switch on their cameras when they're speaking. Thank you. Over to you, Adnan Saab.
Thank you very much, Zainab, for inviting me, and to your team. You're doing a fantastic job, and whatever you share back with us, with the power division, with finance, we will take it on board because of what we've just learned. The excellent experiences that we can learn from, and then also build together. And this sort of think tank get together, we have common issues. We have at the ground level, even though we're maybe slightly ahead of the curve in terms of renewables and on a generation perspective, but what we're looking here is critical infrastructure as far as I'm concerned. So I'll just give you a high level thought on what we're doing in Pakistan, but also from what we've gathered here and through the international experts that have been working on Pakistan for a few years. My background, I'm not a bureaucrat. I've been in banking internationally, and I've done project finance on the energy side, so kind of a bit familiar with this. So, obviously you had at the COP30, the Utilities for Net Zero Alliances. I mean, they told us what the math demands. And to meet the 2030 targets, which keep on sort of going ahead of us, the utilities must spend $1.25 on grids and storage, and about $1 for every dollar you spend on renewables. Today, if we're less than that, if it's 80 cents on the dollar, we're not underfunded in any case. So we're systemically and systematically missequencing the transition. And that is very, very dangerous for a country like Pakistan. We are 260 million souls in Pakistan. We're going to be probably at least 370 million in just a generation. So at least 370, maybe even 390 million people. And we have this huge commitment to fossil fuels as well. And what you see in the Middle East, no one actually foresaw that, but we're going through the motions and we're dealing with it, to the best of our abilities. But this discussion comes at a very critical point in time for us. We discussed sort of a solar panel. I mean, that cannot reach the grid, as Dr. Abid Saleri also pointed out, and also from South Africa. That's not clean energy. It's just an expensive stranded asset as far as I'm concerned. And we have such experiences here in Pakistan when you have certain IPPs in a similar situation. So we live this contradiction daily. And we experienced an unprecedented solar energy generation boom for the last 2 or 3 years that has sort of fundamentally reshaped our energy landscape, as that rapid sort of expansion of distributed generation has literally outpaced our national transmission grid, which is dated. But what do we need to? How do we arrange the funding? So there are a few solutions. I'll just outline as well. But what's happened is this clean energy potential just goes underutilized, while the power system continues to rely on this imported coal. We have imported coal from a few markets. We have RLNG that gets imported. We have furnace fuel that gets imported. And these are all certain conflict zones right now. Some of them are not, but mainly we are dependent there. And that's similar case to some other colleagues who are on this panel. Now, this structural mismatch is what I'd call it. I mean, this drives up the electricity tariffs, similar thing that South Africa is facing. We have a circular debt. It just deepens. We're increasing our fiscal pressure that we have to deal with here in the Ministry of Finance, and it erodes our long-term economic competitiveness for our industry, which is dependent on energy, cheap energy, and they keep telling us, we're just making us uncompetitive day in, day out. So this is very important for us from an economic perspective as well, not just from a livelihoods perspective. Now we have this through our sort of recent federal budget. Was so our budget cycle is 1st of July till 30th June. So we just started this new fiscal year. We allocated just over 10 billion rupees for static synchronous compensators, systems that are used for voltage stabilization. Most of you may be familiar with it. Just over 3 to 3.5 billion on BESS. We've also complemented funding of about 158 billion rupees from own sources of our national grid company that was just pointed out a little earlier, and WAPDA, which actually has the generation capacity as well from a hydel perspective. Now, these are, real commitments, both public capital, but this public capital that we're utilizing, this will not close the gap, and we just need much more of that. So I want to make a sort of a conceptual argument here in this room, because grid modernization for Pakistan, South Africa, Indonesia, it's not just a capital expenditure request. We have to weigh this against the competing fiscal priorities that we have. We all have similar, different magnitudes, but those are human development commitments besides, sort of the loan repayments that we already are committed to. Two precedents that I'll point out to, because I looked at two models, and this is great that I'm learning about the Just Energy Transition Investment Plan of South Africa, and what you're dealing with in Indonesia. What India did was this: they have this Power Grid Corporation. So I looked at that. They issue, and their model is it's a regulated tariff structure. That creates predictable cash flows and becomes sort of self-sustaining. So we are considering that as well. I'm just sharing that because we need to learn from someone who is doing it, and they have a funding already arranged for that, billions arranged through that sort of mechanism. I also looked at Brazil. That's an auction model, demonstrates how the state through Mendes, which provides the catalytic support. They don't need to own and finance everything. Their regulator that runs this competitive public transmission auction. And private concessionaires, when whoever wins, that finances sort of the construction through commercial debt. And then it gets blended as well. So we can learn from those models. And I thought I'd just share that, because those are certain things that, we have lots in the pipeline from a power division perspective. The power ministry, there's BESS, transmission expansion. We have special economic zones, interconnecting them. And that can be done through this auction-ready model, which is what we need to consider more deeply. Naturally, regulation is great, but we'll also legislate, to enable this, and we can do that quite quickly nowadays. So our proof of concept for funding, we did in May just this year. Pakistan's first, it's an inaugural sustainable panda bond. So we went first time into China, into the Chinese capital markets. In terms of dollars, we got $1 billion sort of committed. We drew down $250 million. So it's about renminbi equivalent of 1.7 billion renminbi, $250 million. And that the pricing was competitive. It was 2.5%. Right, so kind of just above concessional, what you can get from IDA and all that, but it was supported by the Asian Development Bank, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, through their credit enhancements. Now, this gives us access to China's deep capital markets, which hadn't been tapped before, at a good rate, and we can keep on tapping it, going forward at rates available through conventional sovereign borrowing. So we still have room, residual position there, another 7 to 7.5 billion renminbi there, because a lot of equipment does come from that market as well. And then the future tranches can also be fine-tuned and directed specifically for transition, expansion, battery storage, and grid stabilization. And I'd always encourage people, who want to learn from each other to, reach out to us through our debt management office. It's right here, and definitely through SDPI. They've been very, very good in coming up with solutions for us. So combining this with our Green Sukuk program, which is an Islamic financing solution, capping sort of the finance markets domestically, and institutional investors abroad as well be going there as well. So these are two capital market channels. The bank market is always there. The blended finance market is always there from the MDBs. But the task is to connect these instruments to a structured project pipeline, not just treat them as a one-off transaction, because there's a lot to be done, right? And we don't want to be sort of blindsided going forward. So it's important we keep the funding windows diverse, open, and then make it more feasible as we come up with new projects. Just lastly, a couple of points. One challenge we sit that sits beyond us.
Apologies.
Can you hear?
Apologies. I can hear you. Just in the interest of time, if you can just wind up in 1 minute, so we can hear from
I'm just doing that. Yeah. So, but these are Zainab, important things that I'm mentioning for the audience. So just bear with me, because we've just learned a lot from South Africa and Indonesia. So the challenge that I was mentioning, if we beyond the reach of the backbone transition or transmission finance, it's our sparsely populated rural clusters. Again, mentioned earlier by the two other speakers. These communities will not be connected by conventional grid extensions of any realistic frame, time frame. So we need a dedicated architecture. The solution could be aggregated mini grid project bonds. We're looking at those as well. I'm looking at those, how those can be pooled as clusters, up to 5 megawatt projects, small projects. We have a lot of that, and we can do that in the north of Pakistan and the south of Pakistan. But we can also do that as run of the river, because we are a riverine nation as well, into a single rated instrument. Individual projects, cluster them, that are typically unfinanceable alone, but you can create a pool there. So the government provides viability gap funding as a first loss layer, and the municipal authorities, they can anchor this at the provincial level through structures that flow the power offtake commitments. ADB, I think you mentioned, is there. I don't know if the World Bank or AIIB are there. Their partial guarantees can cover the demand risk. And the resulting instrument, you can place that with the institutional investors. People, if you're here from finance, they would also appreciate. These are solutions that can be tested. They are tested in certain markets, but probably not at the magnitude that we require right now. 3 asks I have. Well, I'd say, frankly, 2. One is from the MDBs who may be listening to this. Classify grid modernization explicitly within your climate finance windows. We have a sustainable finance framework, but let's just start gelling together. So the current categorization treats this transmission as a general infrastructure, making it ineligible for sort of concessional climate finance. The second is for the architecture itself. We need to extend the guarantee tenors to match the grid asset life. Infrastructure is 25 to 40-year useful life, depending on what we're deploying here. But also it could be less. So depending on what you're deploying, and then guarantees that can extend and expire 10 years, force refinance risk onto the structure that cannot at the moment sort of absorb this. So for me, and for Pakistan, this grid modernization that we've been talking about is about whether countries like Pakistan can break this fiscal trap of expensive, fossil fuel reliability, lower tariffs for households and industry, as I'd mentioned, and we have to build an economy that's competitive in a decarbonizing world. So for me, this is not just a capital issue, it's an architecture issue. But thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Nazam, for sharing very insightful interventions. We definitely have noted them, and we'll include in our research as well. Without further ado, let's move towards our next panelist. We have Mr. Anders Pedersen. He is the Chief Regional Power Systems Officer from African Development Bank. Thank you so much, Anders, for joining us today. So I would like to hear your thoughts and reflections on the case studies that we have presented, and if you would like to share the African perspective around the critical barriers that the grid is facing in terms of financial, technical, and regulatory challenges. And also, if you feel that there are any particular reforms, policy or market reforms and financial reforms that can kind of help accelerate this grid modernization. So over to you.
Thank you so much. And I guess it's good morning and good afternoon for some of the audience. it's a bit of a mouthful that you want me to eloquently present in 6, 7, 8 minutes. So I'll pick a few of them and maybe make some observations along the way that is relevant globally. So I represent the African Development Bank at the regional office in Pretoria, and I just want to mention this because it has a bearing on a little bit on what we're going to say. So I sit in Pretoria, but we run 13 countries in Southern Africa out of Pretoria, and the situation in South Africa is very, very different from the rest of Africa. So that has a bearing on a few of the things that I want to put forward. I think you've had presentations also on the situation in South Africa. But let me start. It presents itself as the only AAA African institution and it presents itself as having a quite a massive balance sheet. So that sounds really good and is of course very important. But when we start looking at what needs to be done and available financing, you will quickly discover that the African Development Bank, the European Union active in Africa, the World Bank and their activities in Africa, the estimates are that if we're lucky, we can cover maybe 5% of the needs. So what the first lesson is really that we need to find ways of bringing in the private sector in the grid, in generation that happens through IPPs and rooftop solar, of course, almost organically. But we need to be very clear that climate financing and MDB financing probably needs to be targeting, key investments and key investments that drives private sector interest, so that they come into the game. So to give you an example, we as the African Development Bank in South Africa are not currently funding sort of standard renewable energy projects for the simple reason that the private sector South African banks can easily pick up the financing needs for sort of, your ordinary 100 megawatt solar system, as it were. And there's an enormous amount of self-financing of rooftop solar and so on. If we call the collective stock of rooftop solar in South Africa, largest utility in Africa. Installed rooftop solar in South Africa is bigger than the installed capacity of almost all African utilities. So a lot has happened in South Africa, but some of the issues that we have, and I'll switch over to the rest of Africa as well, because this is not, from our perspective, is not only about South Africa. But what is happening in South Africa is that that it had a very centralized coal-based model, which I'm probably pretty sure you're aware of, and that meant that the configuration of the transmission system was basically like a bicycle wheel. There was a central nav, and then there were spikes going out. Now you need to reconfigure the transmission system in South Africa, and also you need to a much greater degree, bring in South Africa's neighbors into the renewable revolution, as it were. On South African soil, there's a need to do about 14,000 kilometers of high voltage lines. And I'm taking this call for Botswana, and we are here in Botswana. Botswana is a neighboring country of South Africa. And we're here to discuss with the Botswana government how the interconnection with South Africa can be enhanced, how the new interconnector with Namibia can be constructed, how the interconnection with Zimbabwe can be enhanced, and how the interconnection with Zambia can go forward. And the reason for this is that the renewable revolution in Africa really needs use of complementary resources and the ability to sort of swing them around. That reduces your reserve margin, that reduces prices overall in the market going forward. And that means security of supply is higher, seen as a collective common good. On the distribution level, then that feeds into the distribution level. South Africa is quite unique that it has some very, 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 very large customers. So the payment rate of electricity doesn't look too bad, but it's skewed because you have these massive consumers who actually pay on time. When you start interrogating the numbers at a much more sort of household level, you find that there's a lot of distribution systems that are in dire needs of upgrading and in dire needs of imposing payment discipline and a diagram. And because the payment discipline is not at the last mile end to a very large extent, you don't have a viable way of arguing for upgrading with smart meters and smart SCADA and smart infrastructure in general. Outside of South Africa, the situation is a little bit more traditional in as much as access rates are reasonably high in the major cities, and then it falls off rapidly in rural areas. The lowest access rate on the continent is one of the countries that I work in, Malawi. There, the access rate is only 17%. Now, why am I mentioning this? Because in Africa, the access rate in South Africa is about 92. There's a little bit of an argument around the number, but let's, for the sake of argument, say that 9 out of 10 have access. But in other African countries, the challenge is not so much making the smart grid, but making the grid exist in the first place. Now, it does have some advantages, right? Because if, as a latecomer, you can skip and you can learn. So obviously, there is a lot of lessons that can be learned in terms of smart metering and so on. But as much as we all enjoy and believe in modern technology and the data revolution and all this kind of stuff, rural Africa loads are really, really low, right? And an advanced bi-directional smart meter will cost you. I'm trying to. Let's just say that it will. There are probably South Africans on this call, so I need to get my numbers right. But let's, for the sake of argument, just to be safe, say that a proper bi-directional installation is way above $1,000, right? And then you start realizing that these loads are very, 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 very low, and it doesn't make any sense. So then you come back to just doing sort of basic electrification. That's the level we are at in many countries. And electrification in South Africa and in the rest of Africa and the rest of the continent is very much a discussion about the striking a balance between fostering economic growth, productive use, and then seeing electricity basically as a social good. And I would say, without insulting any government representatives who may or may not be on this call from Africa, it's a difficult balance to strike. And I think not a single country on the continent have really, really, really been able to squaring the circle and getting all those angles right and getting the balance right between how you do that. The investment needs, what am I doing for time? Because I'm also conscious of the fact that there might be people who want to ask questions instead of just hearing me blabbering in any particular direction.
Maybe we cannot take questions at the moment. We are getting a few questions for presentations. We'll be sharing the presentations with the audience as well, and maybe we can respond over the email.
Okay.
So
do you want me to stop here? Do you want me to carry on a bit?
I would say if we can stop here, I would love to listen more of your suggestions because they're very interesting, but I would really want to hear from the other panelists. Yeah. Perfect.
Exactly.
Thank you
Let's
so
stop
much.
here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. So with this, we'll be moved towards Alexei Lamarvi. He's the head director, IRENA Knowledge Policy and Finance Center at International Renewable Energy Agency. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you. Sorry for the delay. So we would like to hear your reflections and thoughts about the discussion that is currently ongoing. So without further ado, over to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the kind invitation to this event on this extremely topical and critical aspect of the energy transition. So a lot has been said already. In the interest of time, I'm trying to focus on maybe just one additional aspect, which maybe has not been discussed that much so far. A lot has been discussed about financing challenges, which was the core topic of the webinar, the discussion today. But I just want to emphasize that when we talk about financing barriers, some of them are real, like capital markets financing challenges as such, which need to be solved by and in the capital markets themselves. But actually, I would say the majority of the challenges we have, and it has been already alluded to many times today, they are challenges in the real economy side of things. And I think it's worth talking about such barriers more as well in this discussion, and understanding that probably more than 50% of the financial barriers are actually not financial sector related barriers, but barriers in the real economy. Of course, we all know the planning, project development, permitting, construction constraints and barriers, which of course are important. For example, if you think of the financing and investment needs in grids, I don't think it is a huge financing gap for sure, but in monetary terms, it's not that much money. That money is out there for sure in the capital markets, just when the frameworks are right. It's much more. I'm much more concerned about this planning, permitting, and construction delays that we're seeing, which I think is much more like a bigger factor delaying the expansion and strengthening of grids. But still, I would still leave that aside. And the additional aspect I would want to talk about here is the grid regulation. I think that is really something that we need to understand, something that is, we are ahead of fundamental reform needs of grid regulations. If you look at the traditional approach in grid planning, grid regulations, tariff setting, etc., so the approach is very much like having sufficient capacity to meet the demand, the loads in all situations at all times, then some buffers and then some buffers on the buffers, etc., just to have enough capacity. Also, availability is an important factor traditionally, as well as grid stability. So while all of these are really important factors when planning grids and operating grids, now moving forward, it becomes increasingly important to move from sort of capacity thinking towards flexibility thinking. So in addition to these important aspects, when we talk about real like incentivizing grid operators, really what they're being paid for and penalized for about should be related to capacity utilization factors of grids actually. So grids are pretty much like fixed cost business, and the more kilowatt hours you are able to transmit through the grid from production to consumption, the cheaper it becomes per kilowatt hour. And if we don't pay attention to this, then an electricity system based on variable renewable energy can become extremely high, and the capacity utilization factor extremely low. If we then give grid operators incentives to increase the capacity factors of grids, we can achieve an affordable, cost-efficient grid. And it's very important that the grid operators will be incentivized to pursue that goal as well moving forward. And that immediately will lead to more flexibility also, not only in the electricity market, but also how grids are operated and optimized. And also in addition to grid capacity factors, an additional future KPI for grid operators will be also minimizing curtailment. So these kind of new incentives for grid operators are really critical moving forward. Then also, we will need fundamental changes in grid tariffs. So we also need to incentivize the grid users to operate in a dynamic and flexible way. So locational factors need to affect the grid fees in the future. And of course, then the timing of the use of grid. So when there is congestion, it should be also shown in the grid fees of grid users, whether producers or consumers, and vice versa. It should also give an incentive to increase the production and consumption when the net is empty, so to say, underutilized. So to, as I mentioned, have a stable grid with high capacity utilization factor, and thereby try to optimize and minimize the grid cost per kilowatt hours. So I think this is something very important. I think that we haven't discussed enough today, and I think it's not discussed enough when we talk about investment and finance. And I also think that these grid regulations, modernizing not only grids, but also the regulation of them will also be key to attracting more investment and finance. We have been talking about climate finance and public sources of finance a lot today, but something we will not have time for, but I would be very keen to continue from here, would be really how to attract actually private finance, what kind of channels, structures we could have to also increase the private finance role in this in the grid investments, and also how to use this climate finance and public sector finance more broadly to attract also private sector finance. As I said, there is enormous amount of capital out there. The question is rather how to efficiently crowd it in. But as said, I'll stop here to leave time for others to speak still. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexei. Really wonderful and valuable interventions. And maybe while we're finalizing our research, we'll get back to you on some of the points that you have just highlighted, because they're really valuable. So without further ado, let's move towards Ms. Cecilia Tam. She's the head of Energy Investment Unit, Office of Chief Energy Economist at the International Energy Agency. So, Cecilia, thank you so much for joining us today. And we would like to hear your reflections and interventions regarding the discussion that we're having. Over to you.
Thanks very much for the invitation to join this very interesting dialogue. I'm very pleased to be able to share some of the insights from the IEA's work on financing grids. Maybe to begin, it's important to highlight how in many of these emerging and developing countries, including the three that we're looking at today, how investments have been financed historically, where we need to be heading in the next decade based on different scenarios, as well as looking at what are some of the opportunities to capture more private capital in investments for grids as well as for energy storage. So, the three markets that we're looking at today, and the vast majority of developing countries rely quite heavily on publicly driven models for network finance. We have seen some good examples in Philippines, parts of India, but also throughout Latin America, of more private sector models. The independent power transmission model was highlighted as an example, I think, in the intervention by Tracy. And that's a good example of how you can set up a private model that runs alongside a publicly SOE-driven model, looking at auctioning out dedicated transmission lines to private sector. I think whether we're looking at a publicly driven model or a privately driven one, what is critical, and I think Alexei's remarks just now really highlight this, is a transparent, predictable regulatory framework. For raising public finance, you need to have cost-reflective tariffs. If you don't, then you're going to be relying very heavily on public budgets to finance transmission. Because if you're trying to attract private capital, what commercial banks are looking for is the ability of and suitability of cash flows to repay the loans. And where an IPT model has done quite well, so in the case of Brazil, is that you do have quite predictable cash flows to enable project financing of transmission infrastructure. And this can be done on a dedicated line. We've also seen successful examples. Philippines is a good one, where you have put out for concessions to the private sector the building, operating, and expansion of a country's transmission network. And again, it's really based on having adequate regulatory frameworks that provide predictability and enable the private developer to raise funding for these transmission projects. If we look a little bit more at the cases of the three countries that we have here, where you do have quite a lot of public financing or publicly driven financing models, we've talked a lot about reliance or the need for MDB, DFI, as well as export credit agencies to help support funding of these transmission projects. In our least developed countries, you see a lot of reliance on concessional funding. And if we just look at the data, the IEA has been able to track just under 10 billion of funding from MDBs and DFIs that are targeted at network investments. If we look out at the next decade, what we see as investment requirements across different scenarios, this increases from about 2 to 3 times. The 3 times is if we're looking at a net zero by 2050 world, where we have a lot of renewables investments that are going to require a more rapid expansion of not only transmission, but also distribution modernization, as well as investments for battery energy storage. And we estimate that concessional funding for these area will need to reach about $35 billion by about 2030, 2035. So a huge increase in and a shifting of what is being funded by DFIs. And I think Anders pointed to this, that African Development Bank is leaving a lot of the investments in renewables, especially utility scale renewables, to the private sector. And so we do need some reforms in MDB and concessional funding to go much more towards grids and less for utility scale solar and wind. And unfortunately, based on our tracking of what different MDBs, DFIs are funding, today still too much is being targeted at generation. And as many of the country speakers have pointed out, not enough is going towards distribution, transmission, and batteries. I need to really focus much more on supporting grid modernization as well. Maybe to highlight what I see and what I think a number of the speakers have highlighted is a bit of a blind spot, which is supporting distribution modernization. Particularly challenging to attract private capital for distribution assets, where in many developing countries, we still see extremely high losses. We have many of the small distribution companies which are over-indebted. They have a poor financial health. And I think, one of the priorities in terms of helping to solve for some of these issues is the need for policy reforms to enable cost-reflective tariffs where possible. Without this, you're not really going to get private capital looking at providing capital for projects. And I think here, more targeted blended finance structures using limited concessional funding can help to manage some of the risks that are out there. But the best way to attract private capital is really through tough policy reforms that do provide for adequate cost recovery of investments, to provide adequate cash flows to attract investments by the private sector. And here, maybe just to end, that the IPT model that has been proven to be very successful in Latin America and is starting to be deployed in other markets in Africa, also in Asia, is one that I think deserves quite a lot of attention and can be supported through national development banks, as well as blended finance structures that are being developed by a number of different MDBs, as well as DFIs. And happy to discuss further offline any of these areas. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Cecilia. Really insightful listening to all the interventions that you've shared, and definitely me and my team, when we'll be jotting these points down and integrating these recommendations into our research, we'll definitely getting back to you guys. One thing that I would like to mention here, that the interventions that you all have shared is going to be a part of our research. This will help us refine our research, be it in the form of recommendations or in some parts of analysis. And also we will be launching this report on the upcoming COP in Antalya. So if you're joining the COP, please do join us for that as well. And without further ado, I will now pass the baton to Tracy for concluding remarks or vote of thanks.
Yes, I think I'm not going to make any concluding remarks. Already well over time, but thank you so much to everybody's inputs. It's been incredibly informative, insightful, and incredibly useful for us in developing this research. So thank you very much to everyone who took time out of their busy schedules to make input for this. We appreciate it greatly. So thank you very much, and we hope to stay in contact on this research. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.